So good morning. I'm really happy to be here with you today. And I wanted to kind of start, I actually didn't expect to have the amount of time I had. So I added a little background, but before I launch into it, I thought I would ask you guys how much background you need. So I just want to have a sense of your knowledge of disability, laws related to disability in education. Can you raise your hand if you feel like you're pretty well acquainted with the history of laws related to disability in education? One. All right, so a handful of us, but not most. All right, so I hope I will try not to bore those of you who are already informed, and I hope that I can bring something to those of you who are new to the topic. So I'm just kind of scrolling through here, some things that parents have said online. So this is my title here. Oops, I'm not going. There we go. So parents are crowdsourcing information on college disability services. How does your college compare? And I'm kind of just scrolling through examples of comments or questions that parents are asking in groups online. So one of the things we're going to look at today is how sort of still very new we are to having disabled students in college and succeeding in college. And for this reason, there aren't a lot of experts to turn to if you are a student looking at college or if you're the parent of a student looking at college. And so people are gathering online on the ground and they're connecting together and they are sharing information. And they go on campus tours and they go back to these groups and they report back what they experienced, what they saw, what they liked, what they didn't like. And I think that this is a real area of opportunity for us. We talked, a little bit yesterday about challenges facing higher ed right now. And so, of course, we're looking for areas of opportunity, right, to grow our student body. And I think this is a real one. But obviously, we have to respond to what people are actually looking for. And so I'm going to switch over to my other slideshow, if you will. It looks a lot similar, but it's not. So by way of a little bit of background, I'll try to keep an eye on the time. Before the federal role in public education, students with disabilities were routinely turned away from schools. Students with disabilities had few educational opportunities. They were segregated from society early on. By 4 years of age or even earlier, parents of children with significant disabilities were pressured by doctors and by educators to institutionalize their children. Those with milder disabilities were segregated in special classes or in special schools. And so they were off-ramped very, very early from getting a real education, from getting a real degree, and therefore from having the ability to go to college or to support themselves and have, a real career. So this began to change a little bit after the World Wars, where people started coming back from the wars with, sometimes permanent disabilities, and attitudes in society started changing a little bit at that point regarding disabilities. So in 1948, there was a mother in New York City who had a significantly disabled child, and she did not want to institutionalize him, and she refused to do it. And so what she did was post this ad in the New York Post, trying to connect with other families who might feel the way she did. At the time, there were really no resources. So, you would get this pressure from your doctors and the educators, and you didn't have really alternatives. There was no support and there were no resources. But as I said, she posted this in the classifieds of the New York Post, expecting really not to hear back from anyone. She got a bunch of replies, and this group formed the core of what was the New York chapter of the AHRC, which we now know as ARC. And this was the beginning of a movement toward actually integrating students with disabilities. But it was a very, very slow beginning. This did not mean inclusion. It did not mean mainstreaming the things that we're accustomed to now. This did not mean that children were welcome in the schools or that they would be meaningfully educated there. Such changes did not begin until the 1970s, and they did not come without a fight. So in 1973, we finally have the Rehabilitation Act of 1973, which is where we get, Section 504. You've probably heard of the 504 document that's used in disability accommodations on the K through 12 level and in higher ed. So it said, no otherwise qualified individual, and that's, again, a really key phrase, with a disability in the United States shall solely by reason of his or her disability be excluded from the participation in, be not denied the benefits of, or be subjected to discrimination under any program or activity receiving financial assistance. So, there's a lot of good in there, but you can note that last phrase, that it only pertains to programs receiving financial assistance. That was a significant limitation. This disability rights movement was a child of the civil rights movement. So you can see by the date, it's a little bit after the heyday of the civil rights movement, but it definitely was influenced by it. And there's a lot of crossover in terms of who was involved in it. So it had certain values that were common to both: equal protection under the law, access to public life, non-discrimination in education, employment, housing, and voting, and of course, marches and protests. So these continued past 1973 because, as you may know, the law as you read it was sort of broad, and we need to write regulations to enact laws in practice, and they just weren't doing it because there was so much resistance. Businesses thought this would be prohibitively expensive to, start building buildings with wheelchair ramps and handicap bathrooms and so forth, and they just were pushing back and no one was doing anything. So the advocacy and the activism went on for a really long time, and it was in 1977 that we began to have a series of sit-ins around the country. Most notably in San Francisco, they occupied a federal building for 25 days in protest. I don't have any pictures of it, but it's definitely something you can Google. There's lots of really interesting photographs and articles about it. It was very successful. They got some support from local politicians and from other civil rights groups in terms of, food and so forth. Finally, the regulations were then written in 1977, and we really began to see some action in terms of getting students out of these segregated environments and in schools, and also in just the general public life. It was, again, limited and insufficient, so we have continued advocacy, and this is a picture of what was called the Capitol Crawl in 1990, and so what they're demonstrating there is that, hey, still no wheelchair ramp, right? Still no way for us to even get into the building to talk to our representatives. And this was a really powerful and effective protest. It was one of many, but it did lead to the signing of the Americans with Disabilities Act in 1990. And this is really significant because it covers all, it's not just publicly funded programs. It covers more broadly. And it also expanded the definition of disability pretty extensively. So this is, again, where we saw a real change, and we began to see actual inclusion. And in fact, I think I've moved a little fast for myself here. We began to see actual inclusion, which doesn't just mean plopping a disabled student in the regular classroom. It means bringing them there with support. So one thing that was introduced a little bit earlier was this idea of the least restrictive environment. Is that something you guys have heard that term, the LRE? Have you? Not so much? Oh, yeah. Okay. So the law says that students have to be placed in the least restrictive environment where they can learn. So in other words, if you can't put them in a segregated class, if they can learn in the general class with supports, or you can't put them in a special school if they could learn in the regular school with supports, right? So that's LRE. It's just a K through 12 concept. But it's important for us, why am I talking so much about K through 12 here? Because what happens at K through 12 determines what we can do in college, right? And what we can do in college determines what the student can do in their adulthood in terms of employment. So with the LRE plus supports, we have students actually succeeding in school, actually getting degrees, actually learning and getting degrees, and they become candidates for college, right? And this is all still fairly recent. So if you figure in 1990, the first crop of those students might have been around 2005 or something like that, right? it's all still pretty new, and we're still exploring it, pushing, trying to figure out where the boundaries of this are, what it means, and learning, I think, as a group, as an industry. Yes, and so in the 1990s, approximately 9% of undergraduate students reported having a disability, 9%. And in the latest reported year, these are figures from the Department of Education, et cetera, the National Center for Education, said 21.8%. So that's a significant increase. So that's what we're seeing. I think we're all sort of feeling it and experiencing it, right? This increase in the admission of students with disabilities. There's still a lot of room to grow. I think the prevalence of disability in the general population is about 28%. So there's still room to grow there. And that's, one example of an area of opportunity for us to close that gap. And here are some other opportunities. Among adults over 25 with disabilities, only 21.2% have a bachelor's degree compared to 39% of adults without disabilities. So that's a real gap. And finally, this last one relates to retention, at least in part. Only 34% of college students with disabilities have completed a 4-year degree, compared to 51% of peers without disabilities. So we're leaving a lot on the table, and we have a lot, I think, to, as I keep saying, an area of opportunity, an unexploited area of opportunity in terms of admissions and retention, and building our numbers, during a period where we are, I think, under pressure from a bunch of different directions. Here's some more numbers that's a little small for you, but that relate to, areas where I used to have a boss who called such things areas of opportunity, problems, shortcomings. There are areas of opportunities. So a mental health survey found that 70% of students with disabilities didn't register for accommodations at their school. So that's a lot, right? 70% didn't even register. And so again, this gets back to retention. These students reported not believing they were sick enough. These are students with mental health disabilities, so mental illness. So not believing they were sick enough, not knowing accommodations existed, and being afraid to talk to professors about their accommodations. So again, if we can properly support these students, they're more likely to stay through graduation. But it's going to take some educating, of the student body and of the whole organization in order to get there. Okay. So we have now, let me see where we are in time. Oh, I'm talking fast. Am I talking fast? We have a groundswell of disabled students now looking at colleges. And when they do, they look at the regular things that, all students look at. Do they have my major? Are the dorms cool? Et cetera, right? But they also have their own set of considerations, right? And, will I be supported so that I can succeed here? And that's what they're looking at. And that's very much what their parents are looking at. And so these are where they do it. These are some examples of groups online where they're having these conversations. Parents of college-bound kiddos with ADHD, parents of college-bound students with learning disabilities, ADHD and ASD, college admissions advice for awesomely average kids, and parents of twice exceptional children. If you know what twice exceptional means, when the student usually has one really significant strength, like a very high IQ. And then a disability. And that's kind of a tough category to address educationally. In K through 12, they tend to slip through the cracks. They look like kind of just mediocre students. The disability hides the giftedness hides the disability, and they just kind of slip through. And it is also associated with things like dropping out and all kinds of the kind of, adolescent adjustment problems we're familiar with. So they are an important group to catch as well, because they should be in college, and they should do well in college with the right supports. So, what do we do to attract these students? As I said, what are the parents looking at when they come to campus? The first thing is, what does it look like, right? And that's just a random office. That's not an actual, Office of Disability Services. It's just a random, messy office from the internet. But And I also want to say that, we're taking now to call it the Office of Accessibility Services, and that's fine, but we don't have to worry about using the word disability. It's not a dirty word, and it's accepted, you can say the word in the disability community. So, I have this picture, and I have to say, in real life, I experienced something very much like this. I had a meeting at a local college within the last year or so, and the meeting was going to be in the Office of Disability Services. And so, when I made the appointment, someone, said on the phone to me, just the tone of her voice, she was like, well, we're in the basement, at the end of the hall. Okay, that's a little, alarming, but okay. And when I got there, I really couldn't find it. And I thought I was in the basement, but there was like a sub-basement, literally. So I finally end up in the sub-basement, and I'm really sick. I'm like, oh, this is going to be really bad, right? But when I got down there, it was beautiful. They had gut renoed the whole basement, and it was just beautifully appointed offices. They were tutoring offices, and they were gorgeous and really nicely appointed and comfortable and pleasant. But I still couldn't find the Office of Disability Services. So I had to stop someone and ask them. And she said, oh, yes, down that hallway, and then you make a right and all the way down at the end, right? So I followed the yellow brick road, and I finally reached the threshold of disability services. And it's like everything changes, literally, at the threshold. All this beauty is just evaporates. And it's this obviously repurposed closet, no kidding. The floor tiles are stained and missing, and the walls are knocked up, and it's incredibly cramped with office equipment. You could not get a wheelchair in there. It would not be safe with a walker. I was astonished. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. It was so depressing, and it was just it's so extremely insulting. It's funny because my younger one's 14, and we're starting to think a little bit about colleges, and I had this on my list for him as a possibility. And I was ill when I left there because of what it communicated, right? And worse of all, one of the very pleasant employees, said, we have a few minutes, do you want me to show you around this minuscule space? Sure. So at the end, she pointed to this room that was in the back of this cramped room, and it was walled off by glass. And she said, that's our separate testing location. Right? And it was all these cubbies. The ones that are all connected, and it's like elbow to elbow. And she said there's 16 cubbies. We had 14 people in there yesterday, like elbow to elbow. I just said, they would be better off in the classroom. That's very much checking a box, right? It's not an actual space where a student can concentrate better, right? And so this stuff really, really matters. Years ago we used to have, I don't know if Erica remembers this, but we used to have a textbook in one of our communications classes that talked about, the ways in which humans communicate. And it said that, 75% of communication is nonverbal, and that when your verbals and your nonverbals conflict, people will believe your nonverbals. Okay? So that's that kind of gut reaction that people have. And it really also talked about so our nonverbals are body language, facial expression, proximity, right, movement, but also what you have around you, right? So it talked very much about what you put on your desk, what you put in your office, and what that communicates. So what is this communicating, right? So what should we do then? Consider questions like this. If the office is in some remote part of the campus, what signal does that send? If the office is cramped or run down, what message does that send? We want to make sure that it's centrally located near other related offices. So they definitely did that right. It was wheelchair accessible because you could roll in from one of the, the building was on a incline. So you could roll in if you had to from one of the levels, and it was near the tutoring department, right? So that made sense. But yeah, think about being near tutoring is good, being near academic advising, but you want it to be central and it should make sense where it is. It has to be accessible. You have to be able to get a wheelchair, a walker, a cane in there safely, right? And then, of course, the alternate testing location is not a box to be checked because the law says you have to have it. It really should be a space where a person can, work comfortably. It should be as quiet as possible. It should be pleasant. It should be well lit, well ventilated, that sort of thing. Oh, and I have an example. Could look something like that. Yeah. And I also want to say that, consider what parents are looking at in these campus trips, right? So why does a parent send their child to college? Anyone want to guess? Why does a parent, especially first generation college student, right? Why do their parents want them to go to college? It's like my class, and I'm going to answer. Yeah.
To give them a better life and more than they had.
Thank you, right? And what you're talking about in part is money. A lot of that, right? It's more money. I mean, I adore higher ed. It's my life, and I wish I could say the reason is they want to read, Chaucer and expand their minds and so forth, but it's not. It's because they want them to be able to earn when they're on their own, right? And so what is the parent looking at when they come to campus, right? There's this argument in the nonprofit world about the customer orientation that college experience is currently, increasingly taking on, right? Our college students are customers, right? And so it's a slightly different question here for us, right? It's a more complicated question, I think, in a nonprofit. Nonprofits are so traditional, so extremely married to tradition. And the faculty, faculty governance, and they push back hard on this. They are not our customers, and they have to adapt to our traditional standards and so forth. And I think that makes a lot of sense in academics, right? So far as the curriculum goes. But in the student affairs end, I think the students are clearly customers, and they should pretty much get what they're asking for. And so what are they asking for? The parents are, again, I'm putting my child through college because I want them to be able to earn when they are adults. And so they are looking closely at career services, right? They're really going to look at that office. And it is good for the college if that office is impressive and it communicates the right things. It has the right resources. It's properly appointed, it's comfortable, it's central, all that kind of stuff. The staff is knowledgeable and helpful. Very focused on how helpful the staff is. This is a lot of what you hear online from parents. So career services, the Office of Disability Services. So all of our parents are going there and they're asking questions and they're looking around. They want to see the separate testing location. They want to, talk about how well prepared are the professors to give accommodations. How well do they understand disability? The last one is campus safety, by the way. So that's something that I know. My college roommate's daughter just went off to college last semester, and my college roommate was a little bit concerned about the town that this college was in. And so I told her to look at the published report of, incidents of, the police reports and so forth for the campus and for the surrounding area. And when she did, she was even more freaked out and said, I'm really scared now. How could those numbers be so high? And so I said to her, you don't really know what those numbers mean, right? It could mean that there are actually more incidents on campus, or it could mean that they've created a culture where people feel safe reporting, and that's why their numbers look so high. So what you have to do is take that report to the campus safety director, right, and have a conversation with him. So this is what parents are looking at, really. I mean, you'll have the occasional parent like me who wants to look at the library, but for the most part, I think it's going to be, the stuff that relates to earning for their child, right? And so again, career services and disability services. So the next thing I want to talk about is faculty training. That's just a random pedagogy, I keep doing that, image from Creative Commons. But this is, I think, an area of great opportunity for us on the college level. So one thing that distinguishes teachers at the K through 12 level from college professors is the instruction they receive in pedagogy. A Master of Arts in Teaching and a Master's of Science in Education program require as many credits in pedagogy as they do in the subject taught. So if you're going to teach, say, social studies or science on the high school level, you get that 36 credit master's. 18 credits are usually in science or social studies, your subject, and the other 18 are in pedagogy, right? But college professors do not experience that, right? So most PhD programs have one or none course, no course in pedagogy. So they come in with no training in this. They are subject experts, but they have no training in any kind of teaching, be it regular or special. College, graduate teaching programs have long really pushed their students into what's called dual certification, which is when you are certified to teach, say, elementary school, plus you're certified in special ed. And this is first of all, it makes them more employable. They can sort of be moved around the building, and schools like that when they're hiring. But it's also because it makes them better teachers across the board. So that the methods that you learn in special education are applicable to all education. And so, you really have these K through 12 teachers coming in with this tremendous level of preparation. In fact, I think I have here, this is for an elementary certification. So you see it's a dual certification, and it starts with foundations, which is, history and theory, introduction to students with learning and behavioral problems, a whole class in classroom management, which is, by the way, a really important topic for college instructors as well. And one that really tends to, I think we lose good people because they don't have those skills, and it's so stressful for them. Foundations of Special Education, there's an entire course on assessment. Wouldn't that be useful? And then more methods and more instructional strategies, and also something on assistive technology. So that would be everything from, something related to hearing, to calculators, to communication devices. And so that's you can see how all of that would be so useful for someone teaching on the college level, and yet we're not exposed to this. Same thing here. This is the high school level, right? And again, it's very much the same. It's again, assessment, methods, and of course there's a practicum, there's an internship, field experience. So this is, a great disadvantage, I think, and it's a great strain on college professors, and it's part of what I think when they talk about the increasing number of disabled students in their classrooms, they talk about that's stressful for them and that they don't feel prepared. And this is why they're not being prepared, right, for any kind of pedagogy, much less the special pedagogy. So some of the things I think we should be looking at, educating ourselves in. First of all, UDL is Universal Design for Learning. I'm sure you've heard of it. And it's about accessibility in designing a course, in the curriculum, in the learning management system, et cetera. These are practices that work well for everyone, and they improve everyone's experience. And they're pretty easy, I think, to learn and to teach. So that is something that might be addressed in a few, in-house workshops. To understand more about neurodivergence, and I pulled that out specifically because I think a lot of physical disabilities are easy to identify. When someone's using a wheelchair or something like this, but you may not know when someone has a neurological difference, right? And this can lead to a lot of misunderstanding. And so I think we need to be educated on what that looks like, what it really is on a mechanical level. So like for ADHD, for example, it'd be really useful if all faculty understood that it's basically a neurotransmitter issue, right? So there's something different about the way the dopamine and norepinephrine function in a person with ADHD, and this is what causes their inattention. It's not a behavior. And when you understand that, you can respond to it more effectively and more productively. And that gets into the emotional regulation of the faculty. I think it's something that both on the K through 12 and on the higher ed level, we just don't give enough attention. It's a stressful job. And when a teacher or a professor is stressed out, they can, not be their best selves, right? And this is something that is of concern for everyone, but maybe particularly for those students with disabilities who are really struggling with their, what they call on the K through 12 level, their learner identity, right? So, going back to ADHD for a second, the student with ADHD has gotten a lot of negative feedback by the time they get to college, both in school and outside of it, for being forgetful, for being late, for being disorganized, right? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. For, not maybe having the best behavior in the classroom. And so their learner identity is really damaged. It's, my son has ADHD, and when he was diagnosed, that's what the psychologist said. I'm really concerned about him. I don't want him to feel like he's stupid. And he does. He feels like he will make one mistake and he goes right back to, I'm so stupid, really. And he's actually extremely bright according to their tests, but he doesn't feel it, right? So the way we respond to our students is extremely important. And especially as they move into adult learning, which is by definition more independent, they need to become independent learners. And if their learner identity has been that damaged, it's not going to happen as well. So we need to work on our own emotional regulation to get, aware of our feelings and be able to regulate them. And this also it relates to respect. So, I think this all is of a piece. I think about my son in the 8th grade. He had this wonderful science teacher. She's brilliant. But I don't think she really believes that ADHD exists, And so one time she'd come over to his desk and she wanted to help him with his work or something. I guess he was just not able to focus. So she banged her fist on his desk, right? And so, this is what we call the accommodation of cues for attention, prompt for attention. Well, that's not how you do it, right? And it's probably actually a violation of FERPA because it drew attention to him and his lack of attention and all that kind of stuff. So again, if she had understood his disability, if she really understood like what makes it what it is, I think she would have been able to behave more respectfully and she wouldn't have been so dysregulated, right? Emotionally, she wouldn't have been so frustrated and so upset, and she wouldn't have lost her temper like that. So it's all of a piece, and it's a lot of educating ourselves, and it's a lot of providing an environment that supports professors and teachers to be their best selves, to recognize that it's a stressful job, and to provide the right supports. I also think some other ways we can address this. We have I'm sure we all have lots of in-house professional development workshops. I think occasionally, obviously you have to choose choose this wisely because it's expensive, but bringing in a consultant for training now and then for specific topics, I think would be important. Finding the dollars for continuing education so people can take a course in, cognitive development, take a course in special, teaching methods and so forth. And also a postgraduate certificate. There's only a handful of these in the country, but these are for people who are already teaching or want to teach on the college level, and they want those pedagogical skills. And one example I found was Howard University. It covers learning theories, instructional technology, assessments, culturally relevant learning environments, and it has a field experience. So it's a great model. I think there needs to be a lot more of this. This would be something, I think, to talk to our state representatives about, at the Board of Regents or whatever. It really needs to be a SUNY program, in my opinion, if only, online. So finally, a sort of a cultural shift, right? So I say a shift from from a compliance mindset to an excellence mindset. This is much more the case on the K through 12 level. I do some advocacy for disabled students on the K through 12 level. So when I'm in meetings with IEP meetings, right, with the Committee on Special Education, they'll start doing this. The parent will say, well, you didn't do such and such, or we need the so-and-so. And the response from the school district will be, the law does not require that. Or it will be, we didn't break the law. That's a big one too. So, right. And so I'll say, wait a second here, you have two languages, right? You've got the language of excellence that you apply to general education, and you have this language of compliance when you speak about special ed. And I think that is something we absolutely have to move beyond, right? We need to have an excellence mindset for all students. When I was talking about, the fact that I was speaking today with my sister, she said, were you going to have, a segment on what happens after college and employment? And I said, well, that's a really great idea. So I think I'll have that on. Again, I don't know how much you know about what happens in high school, but if you have an IEP, an individualized education program in high school, part of that, starting in the 9th grade, should be transition planning. So they start working with the student, planning what's going to happen after school. So they will try to identify career interests. They will try to get them to, take a class in this, work over the summer. But it's a lot of, structured, scaffolded planning. And it really, when it works, they should have a pretty smooth transition to the next step, whatever that is. But even in the best districts, it's spotty. And it seems to be an area where, it just gets sort of neglected. And so they come to us and they still need this support that they should have really gotten in high school. And so to think about that a little bit, in New York, there's something called Access VR. I don't know if you're aware of it, but VR is vocational rehabilitation. And so every state has this because it's like partly federally funded. It has different name in different states, but in New York we call it Access VR, but you can just Google vocational rehabilitation. And this provides all kinds of support for them. It will actually even pay tuition for them. It can pay for books. They can have transportation. It has assistance with job search. It has job coaching, and it has mediation. So this is really important for I think our students, right? Because, depending on the disability, but in general, I'd say this is very useful for the college student who's going off into the world, right? So they have often the cognitive chops, right? They're okay, but there's something else maybe that isn't. Like in the case of someone who's neurodivergent, it really can be those social skills. And I think back to when I was at another college. I used to work in another college many years ago, and we had a student who had a master's from that college, and he had a master's from Columbia, and he had a certificate from NYU, and he had all these degrees. He was a really, really brilliant guy, but he couldn't hold a job, right? He was constantly being fired, and he blamed the college for this, right? So he used to come storming into our career services department and, give us all kinds of remonstrances because he had lost yet another job. And it's funny, at the time I was not degreed in career services, but I remember saying to the counselors, he needs Access VR. That's what he needs. So what Access VR would do for a person like him is actually mediate with the job supervisor, so that there'd be a meeting with the job supervisor and the student and this job coach, and they would talk about the standards and how we're going to train them, and then they would mediate for any problems on an ongoing basis, right? So that's, I think, something to really consider for our students. How to pair that with career services is the question, because you have to be careful of FERPA, right? So student privacy. So it's a challenge, but anyway, I think that we do need to be thinking about special care for our students when they graduate and aligning supports for them before they leave us. And so that's something I really wanted to close with. And I think I may have closed. And I think not bad time too. So I was wondering if anyone had any questions.
So from the parent side, because I was a parent at Trevor, specialized class, I would have linked the web kids for like how we navigate them. Because I know for academic roles, it's trying to figure out our university, but like working with that parent.
So what specifically are like, how did, yeah.
Lots of my own, it is on a sport ring, a mean thing, but only under them inside the mind, and they actually don't know why thing, and I told them why they did it. Well,
yes.
Going forward, I want to.
Yeah.
I'm not a brain parent, friend. So as much as you grow up, right? How do I? The kids have to advocate. Oh, right. So kind of anyone impact.
Yeah.
You talk it. You that's for that struggle without front or twice their short friend. She's a bad mind. So how do you teach that?
What would they say about the 504 plan?
Well, they have to self like.
Yeah.
They'll do by the future, like how I would see it. Just help that.
Oh, right.
They're not again with us now. Well, I like to go for kids back.
Right. Well, I mean, a couple of things. So, it's a cliche that on the K through 12 level, the job of the, whatever the title they give them in whatever school, director of special education, but there's a million different titles. But that person, it's really a gatekeeping job, and it's really budget protection. And so their goal is to shut you down as much as they can. I know that's terrible, but it's true. And so that's kind of sounds like what you're experiencing. That's the opposite in college, really, right? But you have to get past that. And so in high school or in elementary school, they shouldn't have to self-identify, but you mean eventually when he gets to, yeah.
I have been told this year, like, this teacher was hard. Sorry, I'm done with it.
No.
She was hard about me, and she violated the life. And the one, it's a lot of coordinator said to me, they tell us, but this teacher came out and asked me to bring it down. He had to go.
Oh, yeah. No, they do that so that they don't have to argue with an adult. They want to argue with a kid. Yeah, that's what that is. Ignore it. Yes. Everything in writing. So now when you start with an email and he writes it, right? So he writes the email and you edit it or whatever, and he copies you, right? And that lets, then they'll behave a little differently. And so that's how I would say. And so then he gets to practice from the emails and he begins to know how to do it himself. Eventually he'll send the emails himself or have conversations. But I really believe everything in writing is best. Yeah, and so that's how. And then eventually you only step in when it's someone's not responding properly, right? Yeah, and that's, I think, would set him off well for college. Yeah. Anyone else? Yeah.
So, in some of the creative programs, or at least in our fashion department, we've been told that 30% of our students are neurodivergent learners, right? We don't always know that, of course. So, I have a couple questions. What are some tips? That was the tip I thought. Yeah. What are some tips in teaching these students, but as well as in terms of career services in place?
Wow. Okay. So you're talking about like a neurodivergent student. How would the teaching differ? I mean, a lot of it is, I always go back to Skinner and behaviorism, which I really despise. But if you remember the ABCs of behavior, right? Antecedent, behavior, consequence. So the antecedent is the thing that comes before. In special ed, there's this phrase, the functions of behavior, and that all behavior has a function. We talk about all behaviors communication is another way they say it. Even bad behaviors are a form of communication. Sometimes they're the only form of communication available to us for various reasons, right? So if all behavior has a function, I think the focus is always to stay on what could the function be? So pay less attention to the behavior and more attention to what its function might be, and then try to meet that function in a better way or proactively, right? So it might, maybe they get up and they leave the classroom all the time. And this can be very triggering for us, can it not? Right? So, but remember, a neurodivergent person needs more movement, and they may need to leave the room to regulate, right? And so embrace it, right? And just, hey, you're back, this is what we're doing now, what else would, again, be aware of, sensory things that could be, my students all want the lights off. I don't know if you have that experience, but lights are very glary for a lot of people, and it's it distracts them, it upsets them. If you're very sensorily sensitive, it can really begin to agitate you. So, comfort in the room. You may need to repeat things. You may need to say them individually. Obviously you think about multiple modes of delivery, right? Patience, compassion, repetition, flexibility. So those are my recommendations for teaching. And you always have the question for transitioning to employment. I would really encourage them to apply for Access VR. It's something they do have to do on their own, but they can, sit in the office with you while they do it if they want that kind of support. Sometimes you'll see on a student's IEP that they bring from high school, for their documentation, you'll see that, a student was recommended to, apply for Access VR, and yet here they are and they haven't done it, 4 years later. So to, really support that and scaffold that from, it's hard. All this paperwork is so hard. It's so stressful. It's so confusing. It every time you think it's over, it starts all over again. That one, expired. You have to do this, thing again. It's a lot. So people need support for that, I would say. And then you get to partner more or less, not formally, but informally with, you've got someone else on your team in terms of getting them employed. Yeah.
Yeah, we were just talking over how many paid on Access VR as it relates to a student completing a program and then having trouble with the internship. And you find out there may be something causing a disruption. How does that work with Access VR in terms of the student reach out? Do you have agency?
Yeah, I mean, yes, they have to reach out and go through an application process. It's not too terrible, but yeah, that's something they have to do first.
I mean, we hope not the world, right? We do find students that, like, they know there's something causing
Yeah.
workplace to not work.
Okay. Yes. And so they don't need necessarily, the standards are different for this. It's a little bit looser and a little bit, the bar is a little bit lower. So they could, start with like a doctor's, a diagnosis, a letter from the doctor with a diagnosis. That might be enough to get the ball rolling, and it might be enough for them to qualify. Yeah. Yeah. So that would be something you could have that conversation, have you ever considered that you may need support, and, here's this number, if you need some help with this process. Yeah. And see where that goes. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks. It was a great point. I mean, I think it's like a loss that people form with that they worried at and hoping, right?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I told you what I was going to say, but, there are corporations, who are quite evolved, and they actually have a department of, neurodivergent hiring, and it's a goal, and they have, someone whose job it is to support and to hire people who are neurodivergent, but also to support them while they're there. So things are shifting, I think, and I think that, we'll have more and more students, and we'll direct more and more of them to access VR, and hopefully we'll shift the culture a little bit in these companies as well. Anyone else? Okay. All right, great. Wonderful. Thank you so much.